The music was already playing when she stepped out of the elevator. Soft violins, golden chandeliers, laughter that felt like glass breaking inside your chest. Everyone was dressed like royalty, dripping with diamonds, moving through clouds of perfume and arrogance. And there she was, Amara, the cleaner. The woman nobody ever saw. Her navy blue dress clung gently to her shoulders, not luxurious but dignified. Her hair pulled back, her eyes quiet but strong. Every head turned, not because she glowed, but because she didn't belong. Moments earlier, she'd been standing in her tiny apartment in the staff compound, staring at that invitation again. "You're invited, Amara. Black tie only." The message sat in her inbox like a dare. She had thought it was a mistake at first, a wrong address, a cruel joke. But when she asked the office secretary, the woman laughed and said, "Oh, it's real. The sheik must be in a generous mood." That laugh had stung. Still, something inside Amara refused to bow. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the tiny voice inside her that whispered, "You are more than their joke." 3 years she had worked in that tower. 3 years scrubbing marble floors that reflected everyone's shoes but never her face. 3 years watching men step over her bucket like she was part of the furniture. She had learned to move in silence, to smile through it, to hold her head low but her spirit high. But that night, as she stood before the mirror holding that borrowed dress from a kind friend, she whispered to her reflection, "Let them see me." Meanwhile, in a smoke-filled cigar room at the top of the tower, Sheikh Karim was entertaining his guests, oil magnates, crypto kings, men who wore their laughter like weapons. One of them asked, "So, what's this rumor about inviting your cleaner to the gala?" The sheik chuckled, exhaling smoke. "Why not? She cleans the floors better than most people clean their lives. Let's see how she handles a golden room." Another man burst out laughing. "She'll probably come in uniform. Maybe bring her mop." The laughter echoed through the glass walls, bouncing off the city skyline. But Karim's smile was colder than the desert night. "It's just a joke," he said, swirling his whiskey. "People like her don't belong in our world." He didn't know that the world was about to change, quietly, elegantly, without permission. When Amara arrived, she didn't glide in. She walked, slow, steady, careful not to trip on the stairs. The valet hesitated to open her car door, unsure if she was staff or guest. Inside, the room shimmered with wealth, but the air was heavy with judgment. Women in sequins turned their necks. Men smirked. A waiter nearly offered her a tray before realizing she was a guest. "Who let the help in?" someone whispered. "She must be lost." Karim saw her from across the hall. For a second, he almost didn't recognize her. Without her uniform, without her apron, she looked different. Not because of the dress, but because of the silence around her. She wasn't trying to fit in. She was simply existing, and somehow, that unsettled everyone. He approached her with that same smirk, the kind that cut through kindness. "You came," he said, his voice laced with mock surprise. She smiled, soft but unshaken. "You invited me." He studied her face, searching for fear, for weakness. But she wasn't trembling. She stood there, her hands clasped, her back straight, the same way she stood when scrubbing the sheik's marble floors, steady, focused, dignified. For a moment, Karim didn't know what to say. People watched. Cameras tilted. The music faltered slightly. The orchestra's notes seemed to hang in the air, caught between curiosity and contempt. Then one of Karim's friends muttered, "Well, she cleans up nicely." Laughter followed, quiet but sharp. Amara didn't flinch. She just looked around, at the gold, at the glass, at the faces pretending to smile, and said softly, "It's beautiful. But it smells like bleach." The words were simple, but they landed like stones. A few guests blinked, unsure if they'd heard her right. One woman shifted uncomfortably. Karim's jaw tightened. "You have a sharp tongue for someone paid to scrub floors," he said. "I was invited," she replied, eyes never leaving his. "Tonight, I'm not scrubbing." That moment, that silence, stretched long enough for every soul in the room to feel it. For the first time, Karim's confidence wavered. Not because she insulted him, but because she didn't play his game. As the evening went on, she drifted through the hall like a quiet storm. People whispered behind her back, trying to guess why she was there. Some mocked her. Some pitied her. Yet others just stared, unable to decide if they should look down or look away. Amara said little. But her silence spoke louder than their diamonds. In one corner, a young photographer took a picture of her, not realizing he was capturing the night's most powerful image. A woman standing alone, surrounded by light that didn't belong to her but still reflected off her skin. Karim kept watching her, pretending not to. Something about her calm unnerved him. Maybe it was because he expected her to shrink, to stumble, to beg for validation. Instead, she just existed, graceful, unshaken. And it made his empire feel smaller. As the clock ticked past midnight, the speeches began. Billionaires praising other billionaires. Words about charity, success, and changing the world. Amara stood at the back, her eyes scanning the gold-plated room. For a moment, she thought of her family back home, her mother's cracked hands, her little brother's laughter. She remembered why she came to this country. Not to serve, but to survive. And somehow, that thought gave her strength. When the final toast was made, Karim lifted his glass and said, "To power and those who know how to use it." The room clapped. But in that applause, Amara heard only emptiness. Power, she thought, was not in the hands that held champagne. It was in the heart that refused to break. Later, as she quietly made her way to the exit, Karim called out, "Leaving already?" His tone carried mockery, but also something else, curiosity. She turned, her eyes soft, steady. "Yes," she said. "The floor's clean enough." For a second, nobody laughed. The air froze. And something inside Karim, something buried under years of privilege and pride, began to shift. Just a flicker. Just enough to make him realize that maybe, for the first time, he wasn't the one in control. As Amara walked out into the desert air, the city lights glimmered behind her. Somewhere in that towering building, men kept laughing, pretending they hadn't just witnessed something sacred. But Karim stood in silence, glass in hand, staring at the door she'd just walked through. He didn't know it yet, but that woman he invited as a joke had just begun to rewrite his story. And the night, once meant for laughter, now carried a quiet discomfort, the kind that wakes you long after the party ends. The music had softened now, but the laughter, it had teeth. The kind that hides behind polite smiles and glimmering glasses. Sheikh Karim's gala had settled into its rhythm. Powerful men trading business cards, women posing beneath chandeliers, and servants moving through the shadows like ghosts. And in the middle of it all stood Amara. Alone. Steady. Unwanted. She could feel their eyes on her, cold, curious, cruel. Every step she took across that marble floor echoed too loudly, as if the room itself was reminding her she didn't belong there. A woman in a glittering gold dress leaned toward her friend and whispered, "She must have mistaken the invitation for a cleaning shift." They both laughed quietly, covering their mouths behind champagne glasses. Amara heard them. She didn't turn, didn't flinch. But her fingers tightened around her clutch, and for a brief moment, her breath caught. She'd been invisible for so long that being seen like this, seen for mockery, burned in a different way. Yet she lifted her chin slightly, reminding herself, "I earned my place in this room, even if they can't see it." Then Karim appeared beside her, his cologne announcing him before his voice did. "You clean up well, Amara," he said, smirking. A few guests nearby chuckled, waiting for her reaction. The orchestra's violins dipped low, almost as if they too were listening. Amara turned her head slowly toward him. Her expression calm. Measured. "And you don't," she said softly. Her words hung there, simple but sharp, cutting through the laughter like glass cracking. The room froze for half a breath. Then came a few gasps. A nervous laugh. Karim blinked, his smile faltering. For the first time in his life, a servant had spoken to him without fear, and worse, with truth. Amara smiled faintly, then walked away, her heels clicking like punctuation marks on a sentence he didn't know how to finish. Behind her, Karim's friends laughed harder, not at her, but at him. "You got roasted by your maid," one of them joked. Karim forced a grin, but his pride stung like fire. He watched her cross the hall, her presence unsettling in its quiet power. She stopped before the massive art display, a collection of expensive pieces flown in from Europe, painted by names everyone pretended to know. She looked at them for a long time. One after another. Each one polished, soulless, empty. The paintings were perfect, but none felt alive. None spoke. None hurt. A journalist, young, curious, holding her recorder loosely, approached Amara. "You work for the sheik, right?" she asked. Amara didn't look away from the paintings. "Yes," she said simply. "What do you do?" the journalist pressed. "I clean," Amara replied. Her voice carried no shame, only calm truth. "I clean the things money can't." The journalist blinked, unsure what she meant. But Karim heard her. He'd been standing close enough to catch her words, though he pretended not to care. A few people nearby had overheard too, and whispers spread like ripples in still water. Karim forced a laugh. "She's dramatic," he said to his circle of friends, trying to wash the moment away. "All these people want is a stage." But his voice sounded hollow, even to himself. As the evening rolled on, Amara became a quiet topic of gossip. People made jokes, some cruel, some disguised as compliments. "She's brave," one woman said. "Or maybe just naive." Another added, "It's cute when poor people dream." Amara ignored them. She wandered the room slowly, studying the art, the architecture, the faces. She noticed things they didn't, how the waiters' smiles never reached their eyes, how the guests pretended to toast generosity while tipping the servers like they were invisible. She had lived her life cleaning up after these moments. Tonight, she was watching them from the other side. Then something strange happened. When the orchestra took a break, Karim stood to address his guests. He spoke about success, legacy, and giving back, words he'd repeated 100 times at 100 parties. But as he spoke, his gaze kept drifting toward Amara. Her stillness bothered him. She didn't clap. She didn't pretend to be impressed. She simply listened, her expression unreadable. He stumbled slightly in his speech, losing his rhythm for a second. It was brief, but noticeable. A ripple of awkwardness spread. Someone clapped early to fill the silence. Karim recovered quickly, smiling again, but deep down, something had cracked. Later, as the charity auction began, Amara found herself at the back of the crowd, near the staff entrance. She had no interest in bidding. She couldn't afford the price of a napkin in that room, but she stayed, quietly observing. The guests were bidding on things they didn't need, raising their paddles for the sake of applause. One man spent $100,000 on a crystal vase just because another man bid $90,000. Amara shook her head softly. None of this made sense. These people weren't buying art. They were buying validation. Then Karim's friend announced loudly, "Let's make this more interesting. Bring out something unexpected." The auctioneer smiled and nodded. "We do have one final surprise piece," he said. "Something found recently in the chic storeroom. Anonymous artist. No name. No title. But the staff insisted it had soul." Amara's heart didn't skip yet, but the word staff lingered. She tilted her head. Curious. The curtains behind the stage swayed slightly as a painting was brought forward and unveiled. The lights hit it gently, and the room gasped. It was raw. A woman in the desert. Dark skin glistening with dust. Eyes full of sorrow and fire. Behind her, a storm rising, gold against black. Karim turned to his guests, smiling confidently. "A hidden treasure," he said. "Even I don't know where it came from." Amara's hand went cold. Her breath stopped. Because she did know. It was hers. She had painted it years ago, on a scrap of canvas she found discarded behind the storage room. It had been her only escape during nights of exhaustion. When homesickness tore through her chest, she would paint to breathe. She'd hidden that painting in a closet, thinking no one would ever care. Now it hung beneath golden light, and the crowd stared at it like it was sacred. Amara felt her throat tighten. The world blurred for a second. The journalist beside her glanced at her face and whispered, "It's yours, isn't it?" Amara didn't speak. She couldn't. But the truth was already in her eyes. As Karim stepped closer to admire the piece, something flickered in him again, that same discomfort he'd felt when she first arrived. He didn't understand why, but looking at that painting made him uneasy. It felt too real, too human, too her. And before he could laugh it off or explain it away, the auctioneer raised his voice. "Let's start the bidding." And just like that, the room that once mocked her began to fight for her art, without even knowing who she was. Amara stood frozen in the crowd, watching the same people who had whispered about her now throw fortunes at a piece of her soul. And in that silence, between the hammer's echo and her racing heart, a storm began to rise, one that would turn the whole night upside down. The auctioneer's voice cut through the music like thunder. "We'll begin at $10,000, he declared. The lights dimmed slightly. All eyes turned toward the stage, toward the painting that glowed softly under gold light. The image of a black woman standing alone in the desert, wind tangled in her hair, eyes filled with both pain and defiance, stared back at the room. It wasn't polished like the other art. It was rough, raw, real. Amara stood near the back, her breath uneven. That was her painting. She knew every brushstroke, every curve, every streak of color. The streaks weren't random, they were tears she'd turned into light. She'd painted it years ago on a night when the loneliness was too much, when she missed home so badly she could feel her heart tighten in her chest. She never meant for anyone to see it. She'd left it hidden in the storage room behind the cleaning supplies, the only place where she could breathe freely without being watched or judged. Now, it hung in front of hundreds of people dressed in diamonds. 15,000, someone shouted. The crowd murmured. 50,000, another voice rose. The journalist from earlier stood beside Amara, watching her face. It's yours, isn't it? She whispered. Amara didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the stage. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. It's just a painting, she whispered back, though even she didn't believe it. Sheikh Karim's friends leaned closer to him, grinning. It's beautiful, one said. Where did you find it? Karim shrugged casually. Some staff member left it behind. I thought it might make a good filler for the auction. He smirked, raising his glass. Who knew it would actually be worth something? The words hit Amara like cold steel. He didn't know. He didn't see. Not her, not the truth, not the soul behind those brushstrokes. To him, it was just another decoration to auction off. The bids climbed higher. 80,000. 100,000. The crowd was alive now, the same people who had laughed at her earlier leaning forward in fascination. It feels so emotional, one woman said. So human. Amara's throat ached. She wanted to disappear. Yet she couldn't look away. Her story, her pain, was hanging there for them to consume like entertainment. Karim stepped closer to the painting, studying it more carefully this time. For a moment, something shifted in his face. The eyes of the woman in the painting seemed to follow him, unblinking, strong, accusing. He looked back toward the crowd, then at Amara, and something deep inside him stirred. He froze. The way Amara's lips trembled. The way her eyes glistened. It clicked. Wait, he muttered softly, then louder. This is yours, isn't it? The room turned. The crowd, once laughing, now silent. The journalist's camera flashed. Amara hesitated, her hands shaking, then nodded. It's mine. Her voice didn't carry anger. It carried truth. The kind that doesn't need to shout. The silence stretched. Then she added, her voice barely above a whisper, It's how I see the world you ignore. The words fell like stones in a glass palace. Karim stared at her, speechless. The laughter died completely now. You could hear the soft hum of the lights. The tension in the air was so thick, no one dared breathe too loudly. The auctioneer cleared his throat awkwardly. Shall we continue? 200,000, a voice barked suddenly. Then another. 3. The bids erupted like wildfire. 300. 350. 400. By now, people weren't bidding for paint. They were bidding for meaning. For redemption. For a story they could never live but wanted to touch. Amara stood frozen as her past turned into profit before her eyes. When the final bid hit $500,000, the auctioneer slammed the gavel. Sold. Applause filled the hall. But it wasn't the same applause from before. It wasn't arrogance or mockery. It was reverence. The same people who had whispered cruel jokes hours earlier now looked at her with awe. The journalist raised her camera again, her voice trembling as she said, "The cleaning lady who painted the desert." Karim stood motionless. His smirk was gone. His glass untouched. He watched Amara, this woman he'd invited as a joke, now standing under a spotlight brighter than his own. She hadn't needed money or status to win the night. She had done it with truth. A woman who'd been mocked for her skin now stood surrounded by admiration. A worker who'd been invisible had become the story everyone wanted to tell. Karim tried to speak, but no words came. His chest felt heavy. That flicker of discomfort he'd felt earlier had grown into something bigger, something he couldn't hide anymore. Shame. The applause faded. The crowd began to disperse. Cameras flashed. People whispered her name as they passed. But Amara didn't move. She stood in front of her painting, staring at it as if seeing it for the first time. Tears shimmered in her eyes. Karim approached quietly. For once, there was no arrogance in his voice. "I didn't know," he said softly. She didn't look at him. "You didn't care to know." He opened his mouth, but the truth silenced him. She was right. The journalist stepped closer, recording the moment. Karim noticed, but didn't stop her. "Let the world see this," he thought. "Let them see what I couldn't." Amara finally turned toward him, her expression soft but steady. "You invited me here to entertain your guests," she said. "But you forgot, every story begins with someone the world doesn't believe in." Her voice trembled slightly at the end, but not from fear. From release. He nodded slowly, his throat dry. "You're right." They stood there for a moment, two people from different worlds, suddenly stripped of all pretense. Around them, the last guests drifted away, leaving behind only silence and the faint echo of her painting's power. As Amara walked out of the hall, the city lights reflected against the glass walls like starlight. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just walked, slowly, with the quiet grace of someone who had carried her dignity through fire and finally reached peace. Karim watched her go. And for the first time, the man who owned everything realized he'd never truly owned himself. That night, her painting hung on the wall, but her spirit filled the room. It was no longer a gala. It was a confession. And deep inside Karim's chest, something had cracked open, something that would never close again. Days turned into weeks after the gala. The newspapers wouldn't stop talking. From cleaner to creator, the black woman who stunned the Millionaire's gala. The photo of Amara standing in front of her painting, her eyes shimmering under the golden light, spread across the world. She was no longer invisible. But fame wasn't what she sought. All she had ever wanted was to be seen as human. For Sheikh Karim, the silence afterward was louder than any applause that night. Every morning, he'd walk past the painting, now hanging alone in his vast marble hallway. The woman in the portrait, strong, unbroken, defiant, seemed to look through him. No matter where he stood, her gaze followed. He had built his empire on control. But that gaze, her gaze, had stripped it away. He stopped going to parties. Stopped taking meetings. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man admired. He felt like a man exposed. Because every time he looked at that painting, he remembered how he had laughed at her, how he had reduced a soul to a spectacle. One morning, he drove alone to the old servants' quarters, where Amara used to work before being dismissed after the gala. The door was locked, but the scent of paint and cleaning soap still lingered in the air. On the small wooden table lay a torn page from her sketchbook, forgotten beneath dust. "To create is to forgive the world for not understanding you." He sat there for a long time, reading that line again and again until it blurred through his tears. Later that afternoon, he found her. Not at a studio or an art show, but in a small community center near the city's edge. Children gathered around her as she handed them brushes, showing them how to mix color, how to let pain speak through art instead of silence. He watched from the doorway quietly, not wanting to interrupt. She laughed softly as a little girl spilled paint on her dress. The sound of it, the unguarded, genuine laughter, felt like sunlight breaking through cloud. When she finally noticed him, her face didn't harden. She simply nodded. "You found me." He stepped closer, eyes lowered. "I didn't come to justify anything," he said. "I came to ask how to make it right." Amara didn't answer immediately. She just turned toward the children. "Do you see that man?" she asked them gently. They nodded. "He's learning something very important today. That art isn't decoration. It's truth." She looked back at him. "If you really want to make it right, help others tell their stories. Fund their art, not your image." He nodded slowly, taking in every word. And he did. In the months that followed, the Sheikh transformed his foundation into a platform for underprivileged artists across Africa and the Middle East. He gave grants, built community studios, and, most importantly, never put his own name on any of it. But the painting remained in his home, a reminder of the night his soul woke up. One evening, years later, Amara received a letter in the mail. Inside was a photograph. It showed a small museum in Dubai, filled with the works of hundreds of young black and Arab artists. In the center, surrounded by light, hung her painting. Beneath it, a small brass plate read, "She taught us to see." Amara smiled softly, her fingers tracing the edge of the photo. For a moment, she closed her eyes, remembering that night of humiliation, the sting of laughter, and the weight of silence. But it all felt distant now, like an old dream. Because what began as mockery had turned into a movement. And what started as pain had become legacy. In the end, Sheikh Karim didn't just restore her dignity, he found his own humanity. And Amara didn't need anyone's permission to shine. She had always been light. Moral lesson. Respect is not charity. Dignity is not a favor. When you look down on someone, you might just be bowing before the soul that will one day change you.